students, I'm Deepika Bhandari. Today I bring you another learning episode in BSc Forensic Science on behalf of the content writers Dr. G.S. Sodhi and myself on an important unit of paper Crime and Society titled Victimology. In this episode, we will learn about the concept of victimology, its history and its different branches. Further, we will also discuss about the different types of victims, the relationship between victims and offenders, and the interaction between victims and the criminal justice system. The various modules under this lecture are Introduction, History of Victimology, Branches of Victimology, Relation between Victimology and Science, Role of Victim in Crime, Types of Victims, Compensation to Victims, and finally the conclusion. Let us begin this module by learning what is meant by the term victimology. First, the introduction. The word victimology is an amalgamation of a Latin word victima, which means victim, and a Greek word logos, which means a system of knowledge and a discipline. The science of victimology deals with the study of the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. To understand this concept, first we must understand what is meant by the terms victim and perpetrator. A victim is the person who has been harmed by a perpetrator, whereas a perpetrator, also known as the offender, is an individual who has committed the crime against the victim. The law enforcement agencies use the study of victimology and the different theories of victimology to determine why the victim was targeted by the offender. Brent E. Turvey, a famous criminologist, has defined victimology as a thorough study and analysis of victim characteristics. In other words, victimology is a scientific field that studies the statistical data which defines the procedures and causal associations related to victimization. Further, victimization is defined as the process of becoming a victim. This field comprises the actions and events that lead to victimization, such as the victim's experience, its aftermath, and response of the society towards the victims. Victimology therefore consists of the study of vulnerabilities, happenings, influences, and replies by the people, administrations, and the beliefs related to victims. Likewise, we can say that victimology is the study of victims and their psychological effects. Apart from the study of victimization, victimology also includes the relationship between victims and offenders, the interaction between victims and the criminal justice system, and the police and courts, and the association between victims and other social groups and organizations, such as the media, businesses, and social movements. Further, it is not constrained to the study of victims of crime only. In fact, victimology also embraces the different aspects of human rights abuses. History of victimology. Though the literature about victim dates back to the writings by Beccaria 1764, Lombroso 1876, Ferry 1892, Garofalo 1885, Sutherland 1924, Hentig 1948, Nagel 1949, Ellenberger 1955, Wolfgang 1958 and Schaffer 1968. The perception of a discipline to study victims and the word victimology has its own basis with the initial fictions of Benjamin Mendelssohn. Benjamin Mendelssohn is known as the father of victimology. Victimology is important in the general investigative procedure since it not only tells us about who the victims are, their fitness and individual history, social behaviors and personality, but also provides links as to why they are selected as victims by the perpetrator. Let us have a look at the important chronological details regarding the history of victimology. Firstly, in 1924, Edwin Sutherland included a chapter on victims in his book on criminology. Next, in 1937, Benjamin Mendelssohn published data about rapists and victims. 1941, Hans von Hentig published an article on victim and criminal interactions. Further, in 1947, Benjamin Mendelssohn coined the term victimology. In 1957, Marguerite Frey proposed a compensation to victims in London Times. In 1958, Marvin Wolfgang used the term victim precipitation after studying homicide victims. In 1965, victim compensation was first started in California and becomes the first state in USA to start it. Japan enacted criminal indemnity law in 1966. Next, in 1967, the Criminal Compensation Injuries Act was created by Canada, Switzerland and Cuba. In 1968, Stephen Schaffer wrote the very first textbook on victimology titled The Victim and His Criminal. Further, in 1979, the World Society of Victimology was founded in Germany. In addition, in 1985, the United Nations adopted the basic principles of justice for victims of crime and abuse of power. We will now discuss about the different branches of victimology in detail. Branches of victimology. As mentioned earlier, the science victimology includes the study of victimization along with analyzing the relationships between victims and offenders, the interaction between victims and the criminal justice system, that is, the police and courts, and the association between victims and other social groups and organizations such as the media, businesses and social movements. Victimology can therefore be divided into different branches as per their applicability. Module 3, Branches of Victimology. As mentioned earlier, the science victimology includes the study of victimization along with analyzing the relationships between victims and offenders, the interaction between victims and the criminal justice system, that is, the police and courts, and the association between victims and other social groups and organizations such as the media, businesses and social movements. Victimology can therefore be divided into different branches as per their applicability. The different branches of victimology are: general victimology. General victimology pertains to a broader emphasis on the study of all the types of victims and not just the victims of crime. Some scholars also refer to general victimology as victimity. This branch of victimology includes the study and comprehension of 5 specific types of victimization. These are criminal victimization, self-victimization, social environmental victimization, technological victimization and natural disaster victimization. The next important branch of victimology is theoretical victimology. Theoretical victimology is majorly concerned with the causative or causal explanations of victimization. It therefore focuses on the collection of data and its analysis and formulating theories based on the results obtained from the data collected. Various theoretical models have been put forth to explain the disparities in victimization risk, correlation of victimization and repeated victimization. These models focus largely on victim demographics as well as on victim-offender interactions and relationships. Penal victimology focuses mainly on the role of the victim in relation to the social forces that result and follow from criminal acts which are defined by the court of law. The initial victimologists such as Hans von Henting and Benjamin Mendelssohn were considered penal victimologists. Research findings emerging from this paradigm focused on the victim's role in both crime causation and criminal proceedings. Lastly, let us discuss about critical victimology. The latest branch of victimology to have emerged is the critical victimology. Critical victimology is concerned with the social environment in which the crime occurs. It caters to the effect of social structure on criminal victimization. Accordingly, critical victimologists are concerned as to how crimes are defined as well as in why some victims are overlooked or ignored by both the criminal justice system and society as a whole. Let us now proceed towards the relation between victimology and science. Relation between victimology and science. As discussed earlier, victimology is a scientific field that studies the statistical data, which defines the procedures and causal associations related to victimization. By reviewing victims' facts, experts increase evidences against the criminals, which supports in outlining or identification of the criminal. The applicability of scientific methods serves in analyzing and interpreting the data obtained from different sources. This is statistical investigation is done under the given steps. Collection. Collection of data constitutes the first step in a statistical investigation. Maximum care must be applied in collecting data since they form the basis of statistical analysis. If data are faulty, the inferences made can never be replicable. Organization. Data collected from published sources are generally in organized form. However, a large mass of figures collected from a survey frequently needs organization. The first step in organizing a group of data is editing. The collected data must be edited very carefully so that the errors, variations, irrelevant answers and wrong computations in the returns from a survey may be corrected or adjusted. After editing of data, next step is classification of data. The reason for classification is to arrange the data according to some common features possessed by the items that contain the data. The final step in organization is tabulation. The reason for tabulation is to arrange the data in columns and rows so that there is absolute transparency in the data presented. Presentation. After the data has been collected, data presentation in an orderly manner facilitates statistical analysis. There are two different modes in which the collected data may be presented. Diagrams and graphs. The next step, the analysis of this data. Analysis. After collection, organization and presentation, the next step is that of analysis. The purpose of analyzing data is to dig out information useful for decision making. Methods used in analyzing the presented data are numerous, ranging from simple observation of the data to complicated, sophisticated and highly mathematical techniques. Interpretation. The last stage of statistical analysis is interpretation, that is, drawing conclusions from the data collected and analyzed. The interpretation of data is a difficult task and necessitates a high degree of skill and experience. If the data that has been analyzed are not properly interpreted, the whole object of the investigation may be defeated and fallacious conclusion can be drawn. Correct interpretation will lead to a valid conclusion of the study and thus can aid one in taking suitable decisions. Further, the different trends in statistics give information such as social status, that is the kind of area someone lives in, work and working conditions which often play a significant role in why a person has become a victim. This information also helps in our understanding of victims and the criminal. Local authorities also rely on the statistics to work towards implementing the course of action that will prevent or reduce different types of crime. Profilers are certain that it is significant to collect details or history about the victim. The victim's source, physical look, traits and features have complemented the data, which can be estimated at and after departure from a crime scene. In the occurrence that a number of victims have been established above a sequence of months or years, facts such as this may explain why the victims had become targets. Victims will likely have been chosen because of their surroundings, their physical appearance and capabilities and their social standing, such as homeless adults and offspring, prostitutes, refugee workers, homosexuals or unmarried females. They will every so often be incapable to protect themselves and incapable of calling for help because of their surrounding or their sensibility. We will now learn about the role of victim in crime. Role of victim in crime. The role of victim is very important in terms of criminal investigation and in court. The victim gives important information about the crime, which helps the investigating agencies in solving the crime as well as helps the court in conviction of the accused. Further, cooperation between the victim and the investigating agencies is a must for gaining valuable information about the crime. Therefore, participation of victim is very essential for effective law enforcement processes. Victims have therefore become an integral part in giving direction to the criminal justice system. The next section in this episode deals with types of victims. Types of victims. Victimology is an individual's threat of becoming a victim because of his or her individual, specialized or social life. Having a close information about the victim's existence and habits provides the reason that why the specific person was selected at a set time and place for the commission of crime. This information divides victims into the following three categories. These are low risk, medium risk and high risk victims. Low risk victims. These type of victims tend to remain close to work and home. They do not go to common places they do not know properly. They lock their entrances at night. They grip stable works and have numerous friends. medium risk victims. These type of victims may work close to home and lock their doors at night. However, these individuals are indiscriminate and at times they go out at night by themselves. The last category of victims is high risk victims. High risk victims. These types of victims are those who live in high risk conditions. For example, prostitutes, people who particularly walk on the lanes at very odd timing, noticeably fall into this group. They typically work during night hours, interact with strangers regularly, willingly climb into cars with strangers and therefore are easy targets. Other high-risk activities include use of drugs, sexually energetic lifestyles, night shift jobs and connection with other people who possess criminal tendencies. Criminals choose their victims based on their individual fantasies and their victims' susceptibility. Criminals choose their victims based on their individual fantasies and their victims' susceptibility. Some victims are just grabbed as victims of opportunity. Low risk victims are less prone in comparison to high risk victims. However, anyone can be present at the wrong location at the wrong time. Other victims are swift as they are suitable for the role in the criminal's imagination. Criminals may devote a little time, possibly days or weeks, planning for the perfect victim, that is, the individual who most possibly matches his fantasy. Psychological autopsy is an important form of victim profiling. A psychological autopsy is done when the method of the victim's death is not distinct. Criminal investigators are uncertain whether the victim's death was unintentional, suicidal or homicidal. To resolve this, the forensic psychiatrist digs into the victim's school, work, medical and family histories. The forensic psychiatrist interviews family, friends and associates, evaluates autopsy, police and witness reports. The objective is to regulate whether the victim was the type of person who was living in a high stress situation to take his or her own life or living a lifestyle that made him or her easy prey for a killer. Further, different criminologists have given various forms of victims on the basis of different criteria. Mendelssohn has given 6 types of victims according to the degree of their contribution in crime. These are: first, entirely blameless sufferers. Example, small babies or offspring who are raped or killed or abducted devoid of their knowledge. Second, victims with negligible guilt, like pregnant women who goes to quacks for abortion. Third, victims more guilty than the offenders, such as those who provoke others to commit crime. Fourth, the most embarrassed kind of victims are the ones who commit crimes contrary to others and get injured or destroy themselves. Example, a rapist who gets murdered by his victim who responds in self-protection. Lastly, fake victims such as paranoids, overexcited and confused persons who give evidence in the courts in order to obtain sentence against an accused person. Further, Walter Reckless in 1961 has talked of 2 types of victims. These are reporting and non-reporting victims. The former is one who does not bother for the consequences of recording his discrimination but is relatively interested in receiving the offender punished or receiving some relief for his suffering, whereas the later is one who is unwilling to report because he or she fears reprisals or social consequences of doing so. Fatah in 1967 has identified victims as non-participating, latent, provocative, participating and false victims. Wolfgang 1967 has mentioned 5 types of victimization. These are primary victimization including personalized or single victims, secondary victimization, in this the victim is an impersonal target of the offender. Example, a robber in a department store, a person roaming without a ticket on a roadways bus, etc. Tertiary victimization, which affects the public or the administration of society. Fourth, mutual victimization, which concerns those victims who themselves are offenders in a given mutually consensual act, example adultery. And fifth is no victimization, which is an action of insignificant impact where there is no immediately recognizable victim. Von Hentig, in his book titled The Criminal and His Victim in 1948, has given 4 types of victims. These include: first, victims whose wounds might be the price of a greater gain, example in abortion. Second, victims who bear the unfavorable result of the prohibited activities partly by their own concurrent effort, example prostitutes. Third, victims who provoke or initiate the offence, example by challenging the opponent to kill him if he can, and in an emotional state of mind the opponent accepts the challenge and attacks. And lastly, fourth, victims who desire the injury. Hentig has further classified the attitudes of victims as lethargic attitude, submissive or convening attitude, cooperative or contributive attitude, and fourth, provocative or investigative attitude. Lastly, the US Department of Justice Workplace for Sufferers of Crime has also identified the following types of victims or victimization. First, adult molested as child, adult of group age of 18 or older, that is sexually abused as a child. Second, adult sexual assault. Sexual offence comprises rape, incest, fondling, exhibitionism or pornography of an adult age 18 or older. Third, aggravated assault, deliberately causing chronic wound by a deadly weapon, unlawful intended struggling, frightening to cause chronic injury with a dangerous weapon. Fourth, arson, any deliberate or intentional burning or effort to burn with or without intending to deceive a dwelling, house, public building, motor vehicle or aircraft or personal property of another. Fifth, assault, illegal outbreak by one individual on another with or without a weapon that imposes or efforts or threatens to wreak physical injury. Sixth, child physical abuse, due to severe beatings, burns, strangulation or human bites, non-accidental injury caused to a child or other adult by his or her parent. Seventh, child sexual abuse. These are sexual offences by parents against a child or other adults. Eighth, domestic violence. Violent acts involving a current or former spouse or domestic partner. Ninth, DUI or DWI crash. Accident involving one or more motor vehicles in which at least one driver was under the influence of alcohol or drugs or was legally intoxicated at the time of the crash. 10th, elder abuse, Abuse perpetrated done by a caretaker on an elderly individual who depends on others for support and assistance. 11th, fraud, deliberate deception perpetrated for unlawful or unfair gain. 12th, gang violence, criminal acts committed by a group of 3 or more individuals who regularly engage in criminal activity and identify themselves with a common name or sign. 13th, human sex trafficking. Human sex trafficking is defined as the commercial act induced by fraud, force or coercion, or where the person is made to perform such acts who has not attained the age of 18 years, or the hiring, transportation, harboring or obtaining an individual for services or labor by the subjection of involuntary personage, debt, bondage or slavery. 14th, identity theft, a crime in which an impostor gets the information about the personal information like social security or driver's license numbers in order to impersonate. 15th, robbery. It is defined as the act of taking or making an attempt to take anything of value from the custody, care and control of the individual by threatening him or by force or violence. 16. Sexual offence, forcible rape, attempted rape, statutory rape, sexual harassment, prostitution or any other unlawful sexual contact and other unlawful behavior intended to result in sexual gratification or profit from sexual activity. 17th, stalking. Stalking is any unsolicited contact among two individuals that directly or indirectly communicates threat or places the victim in fear. And lastly, 18th is white collar crime. It can be defined as a non-violent type of crime committed for financial gain by deceiving individuals with special technical and professional knowledge of business or government. In the last section of this episode, we will discuss about the compensation to the victims. Compensation to victims. In India, Section 357 of Criminal Procedure Code or CRPC defines the order to pay compensation to victims. This section is divided into 3 parts as stated. First, when the punishment is given to the accused and the fine is the part of it. In this, the court may order the whole of part of the fine given to prosecution for covering the expenses, to the victim for any injury or loss produced during the offence, to the victim's family when the victim died, and in case of loss of property during crime like theft or robbery. Second, when the punishment is given to the accused but fine is not the part of it, then the court may order the accused to pay certain amount of fine to the victim who has suffered any injury or loss. And lastly, when the compensation is awarded but it is subjected to appeal, then payment will be stopped until the appeal is presented in the court. Let us now conclude this episode by revising what we have learned so far. Conclusion. Victimology is the study of victimization, including the relationships between victims and offenders. It consists of study of the precursors, vulnerabilities happenings, inferences, retrievals and replies by people, administrations and belief related to victimization. Low-risk victims are less prone to place themselves in vulnerable positions than high-risk victims. The police can defend your individuality throughout the investigation and the initial days of a trial. In certain cases, they can even protect your identity during the trial itself. The victim's source, physical look, traits and features have appreciated data which can be estimated at and after departure of a crime scene. The victim's source, physical look, traits and features has appreciated data which can be estimated at and after departure of a crime scene. With all these information, here we come to the end of today's lecture. Do keep in mind what we have discussed today. This is time for your self-study. If you want to learn more for enhancing your knowledge, you may log on to our website www.cec.nic.in for MCQs, quiz and LORs. Till then, keep studying, stay connected and goodbye.